The Houston area survey may be the longest continuous public opinion and demographic survey of any city in the world. The survey provides an objective and continually updated assessment of the remarkable economic and societal changes that have been taking place in Houston, while also revealing what residents think about ongoing trends. The survey includes topics such as education, crime, economics, healthcare, discrimination, immigration, abortion, sexuality, the environment, and transportation. Tonight, a look at this year's results and what they mean for Houston. I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. And joining me tonight is Dr. Stephen Klineberg, co-director of the Kinder Institute at Rice University. Before we start, remember you can share your thoughts throughout the show on Twitter using hashtag Houston8. And welcome. Welcome back, I should say.
You bet, Ernie. Thanks. Great
31 years of this.
I was a very young man when we started.
Have you found that, and I first question, looking at the way you folks have done the survey, does it make sense to do it every year? Can we notice differences year to year, or would it make sense every 5, every 10 years?
Yeah.
Why do you choose to do it this way?
It turns out that it really does make sense. This city is undergoing such remarkable changes, and people are coming to grips with them in different ways, and there's always surprises. And I thought that too. Maybe every 3 years, yeah. But each year has brought a new clarity to where we're heading and what's happening. It's a fascinating city. I tell people what a great place to be a sociologist.
Take us back to the very beginning of it, too, because that helps explain why you do it every year. Because when you started in, 82?
1982.
We were in very good times. Yes. And already by 83, the bust had happened.
Well, that was the story. I mean, I get unfairly credited with having planned to spend my life studying this incredible city. It was a one-time survey. Houston was booming. The oil boom was going like gangbusters. 1 million people had moved here between 1970 and 1982. Growing concerns, however, about traffic and pollution and crime. Who cares? Come on down and make money. One-time survey. Never occurred to us to do it again. 2 months later, the oil boom collapsed. And by the end of 1983, 100,000 jobs were lost. And we said, we better do this survey again. And so my students and I now, for 31 years, have been asking a representative random sample of Harris County residents, how do you see the world? What's happening in your life? And sitting back and watching the world change.
Do you find that the change that happened between those very first 2 years, has anything as drastic changed in people's opinions and thoughts in any other years?
Well, there was when we asked people what's the biggest problem facing people in Houston, a big jump from 1982 or 83, I guess. It was 83, we weren't quite sure, to 84. It's a massive jump in people preoccupied now with the economy. That happened again in 2008 to 2009 with the recession. The same sort of jump. And still today, concern about the economy is the biggest concern that people have in Houston.
Okay, let's talk about this survey.
Okay.
Let's find out. Anything surprise you going in?
Yes, several things. More this year in some ways than in most previous years.
I read that you'd said that, and I'm curious as to why you think that was. Why do you think there was such a surprise for you until we get into what it is?
Well, it's surprising. I mean, we're watching gradual trends develop, and the beauty of this process is that any 1 year, is this high or low? Is this good or bad? But you can watch it change over time, and then you can ask, is this a real change, or will it go back to where it had been before? And this survey this year confirmed a series of changes that we were watching in a way that was really quite dramatic, and I think unmistakable. The largest and biggest, I think, is that this is the most automobile-dependent city in America. After we used to be a transit-oriented city when we were 45,000 of us living. Before 1900, when Galveston was destroyed and oil was discovered, the two things that sort of transformed Houston. Since 1900, we have been a city built by, for, and on behalf of the automobile, made possible by air conditioning, and we spread everywhere. The least dense, most automobile-dependent city. We asked people, if you could live in any kind of housing that you wanted in Houston, what would you prefer? And 2 years ago, 57% said I would prefer to live in a single-family home with a big yard, even if I have to drive most of the places I need to go, thank you very much. But 41% 2 years ago said I would prefer to live in a more urbanized home within walking distance of shops and workplaces. And we were surprised at 41%. Today, 52%. More people today say I would prefer to live in a more urbanized home within walking distance of shops and workplaces than I would like to live the way Houstonians have always lived in a single-family home with a big yard.
Why do you think that is? I mean, I still think the American dream, as it is put out there by the media, is that home and the yard and the dog and the kid.
Right.
Why? What happened?
There's a series of things that have been coming together, not just in Houston, but across America. The romance of with the automobile has changed. My students, they have much, when you and I were kids, that's what you waited for, is to get your driver's license. We knew every make of car. There were Sunday drives we used to take. The automobile is now a mess. It costs more and more money to drive. The congestion is getting worse. The gasoline prices are going down slightly, but they're not going to go down very much, right? And when the suburbs were built, 65% of all of us lived in households with a husband and a wife and 2.5 kids and a dog and a station wagon. Today, less than 1/3 of all households in Houston contain children. And so,
really?
So, and the fastest growing rise of the empty nesters, the kids have grown up, there they are in the suburbs. You got this tremendous group of people, young creatives coming here, the dinks, double income, no kids. And you've got 25% of all households are singles, living alone, connected to.
Do we find that's because people are living longer, so they have more of a life without children at home, or are they choosing not to have children?
Mainly the first. I tell my students, you graduate from Rice at the age of 21. You have 60 years of vigorous adult life ahead of you.
Right.
And the whole idea of that, the suburbs came out of a different era in American history. Doesn't mean that people don't want to live in the suburbs. There will be another 1 million people moving into Harris County, we think, in the next 20 years. They're going to live everywhere. But what has happened as a sea change is a much more interest in having the option of living within walking distance of shops and workplaces. And another thing that connects to this is we started asking back in 1999 of Anglos living in the city, how interested would you be in someday moving to the suburbs? And Anglos living in the suburbs, how interested would you be in someday moving to the city? When we first asked that question in 1999, 52% of all the Anglos in the city said, I want to someday live in the suburbs. And only 26%, half as many, in the suburbs said, I would like to live in the city. Every year we've been watching the interest in the suburbs go down, interest in the city go, and it's now crossed. And in this year's survey, 33% of those Anglos living in the suburbs said, I would someday like to live in the city. And only 26% of people in the city saying, I would someday like to live in the suburbs. So that transformation has brought a kind of a new demand for the alternative, for the choice, for the option of a more urbanized
While
lifestyle.
that happens, what happens to other ethnic groups then? What about Hispanic? What about African Americans?
The trend is the same in all of them, but it was particularly clear in the Anglos that African Americans have a special relationship to downtown Houston, so when they're out in the suburbs, they're still going to churches. So we just thought, but in all three communities, you see very much the same pattern.
Talking about what we term minorities, and it really is an empty word at this point, our demographic makeup.
It is the central story of Houston. When we first did the survey, and you know, during the story of Houston is during the oil boom years of the 60s and 70s until 1982, virtually all the growth of the city was Anglos, pouring into Houston from everywhere else in the country, because this is where the jobs were. In the stagflating 70s, while you guys up in the Northeast were having your Carter Malez, we were booming. And after the oil bust of 1982, the Anglo population stopped growing. And all the growth of Houston in the last 30 years has been non-Anglo growth, and this biracial southern city, dominated and controlled and automatic, taken for granted away by white men throughout all of our history, has become the most ethnically diverse city in the country. We just beat out New York as the most ethnically diverse metropolitan region in all of America. We have a more even distribution among the 4 great communities of America than any of the other multi-ethnic melting pot cities. Very few Asians in Miami, very few Hispanics in San Francisco, very few African Americans in Los Angeles. This is where we meet. Harris County in 2010 was 8% Asian, 41% Latino, 18% African American, 33% Anglo. Just striking. And it is where all of America is going to be within 25 to 30 years.
How about as we see these changes happen, what do you see in the reactions of different groups to this change?
So another surprise in the surveys, and it's again sort of a confirmation of a trend, there is growing acceptance of this fundamental reality. I mean, here it is. I'm often reminded of the work in psychology on the psychology of inevitability. If something is happening in my world, that I'm not particularly happy with. I would not have chosen. It's not what I wanted, but here it is, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. It triggers in the human psyche, thinking maybe this is not such a terrible thing. Maybe we can make this work. Maybe I can make money off of this. And you can see the city increasingly accepting and recognizing the potential opportunities that this ethnic diversity provides. Two quick examples. We asked, do you think the increasing ethnic diversity in Houston will eventually become a source of great strength for the city or a growing problem? More people today than ever before say it's going to be a source of great strength. We said, how would you rate the relations among ethnic groups in the Houston area, excellent, good, fair, poor? In all three of the communities, Asians are too small to get in the random sample. We do special surveys of the Asians in several years. But in all three communities, more positive views of ethnic relations in Houston than we've ever seen before.
Do you find that the reactions
process is underway
of people in the different groups match up with, I don't know how to say this, but crime statistics? Do you see that as there is more acceptance, there is less problem through the criminal systems?
Certainly fear of crime and this association of crime with minorities is a factor in the anxieties of people. Fear of crime in Houston has gone down consistently. We've asked every year, how worried are you personally that you or a member of your family will be the victim of a crime? And the number of very worried has gone down dramatically, and it's consistently over the years. So that's been a big factor. There's much less antagonism toward illegal immigrants today than we've seen in past years, and that I think has to do with the decline in the number of immigrants that have been coming. So it's not a big issue, but it's also a kind of recognition that this is who we are now, and these are people who are doing very important work in this in our economy, and so it's a gradual sort of reinventing of ourselves for the 21st century.
Do you find when it comes to being a conservative group of people, oftentimes we think of Texas, very conservative area. Houston tends to be more liberal than the state as a whole.
But only slightly, yeah.
But do we find trends and shifts in that? Do you look at that also?
Well, there's tremendous variation. That's one of the most fascinating things for us sociologists. It's not just how has the general population changed, but who changed and who didn't. What are the determinants of individual differences in the construction of reality, how we perceive the world? Is immigration a good thing or a bad thing? Those are constructions. Those are sort of interpretations, and people make different interpretations depending on where they are in their lives, and differences by ethnicity, differences by living in the suburbs of the city, differences by length of time in Houston, differences on a whole range of...
Do we know, are we a more conservative religious group than we were before? Are we seeing growth in religion? Are we seeing growth in certain values? And are we seeing drops in others that were traditionally assumed to be
we're not. We remain a very religious community. About 35% of us are religious fundamentalists in terms of the Bible and the conservative, the Christian conservatives. There's been a steady, about 10% are secularists. What we have watched is, of course, a drop in Protestants and a rise in Catholics, and a tripling in our surveys of numbers saying I'm Buddhist, Hindu, or Muslim, as we become a microcosm in Houston, not just of the world's ethnicities, but of the world's religions as well.
As we become an interfaith city, do we see that tell us anything about us as a people?
So I think that has helped to create this increasing acceptance of whoa, this is who we are now, and an increasing appreciation that this is maybe not such a terrible thing.
Yeah.
But not at all surprising that large numbers of people are uncomfortable with all of this. We in America, we become a city of immigrants, a nation of immigrants again. For 50 years, there was virtually no immigration in America. The last time we were a nation of immigrants, when 15.9 million immigrants came into this country between 1890 and 1914, we didn't like it at all. They weren't Protestants, they were Catholics and Jews, and they had no history of democracy. They're coming to take our jobs and destroy our country. And that we reacted with an incredible racist sort of sense of we've got to preserve America for the Nordics, who are the most intelligent of the white race. We've always felt in America that the last group of immigrants were great for this country. The current immigrant wave is destroying America. And so it's not surprising that there's this. And I tell people, you got to be gentle with Anglos. In 1980, Harris County was 63% Anglo. Today, it's less than 33% Anglo. That's a very big change, a very short amount of time. No one consulted with me before all these people came. So it's not surprising that there's, of course,
but you say that,
anxiety.
and you would think that there would be stress and anxiety about it, but you're saying now in this survey this year, it seems to be dissipating that stress and anxiety about that.
Well, I've got to be careful how I'm saying this. There's a trend in a positive direction along those lines. So it went from 40% to 55%, right? So, but it still leaves 45% who are saying relations are lousy, and this ethnic transformation is going to be is not going to be a great strength for Houston, but a growing problem for the city. Okay. But the numbers are shifting in ways that are very encouraging and important.
And when you talk about then the uncomfortable nature when it comes to the immigrants coming in, it seems as though that tied in very closely to the economic situation we were in as a country. And as we had those economic problems, then all of a sudden all the illegal immigrants were stealing all our jobs, even the legal immigrants were stealing our jobs. Do you see now that the economy is kind of leveling out or feeling a little more favorable?
Yeah.
Does that have anything to do with these relaxed feelings?
I don't think so in this case, because what is striking in unemployment in Houston has dropped from 8.4% in February of 2011 to 7.3% in February 2012. And the percent saying job opportunities are excellent or good has jumped dramatically, right, in concert with that. On the other hand, we asked people with children, did you have any difficulty in the last year buying the groceries to feed your family? More people today than ever before, 32%, said, yes, I did have difficulty buying the groceries. The rising tide no longer lifts all boats. The economy is improving overall, but most people, and we asked people, how have you been doing financially over the last 3-4 years? A slight drop in the percent saying that they've been doing better this year.
So this year, the economy their appearance of the economy was bleaker this year than last.
So we are in a new kind of economy where the rising tide no longer lifts all boats. The central political challenge of our time is how to restore the equalizing institutions that used to ensure that most Americans could share in the prosperity of the country. That gap, and we found in this survey for the first time a major jump. We asked a question that nobody likes. It said, are you in favor or opposed to government? Would you favor or oppose government taking action to reduce the income differences between rich and poor in America? And for the first time, a majority of Houstonians said, I'm in favor of government taking action to reduce those income differences. That perception of inequality and that experience of an economy that's looking well for some people but not for many, many others is a central challenge and a central reality across the board in America.
To go back to an earlier question I asked then, does that correlate at all then with people who perceive themselves as conservative or liberal politically?
So we are absolutely divided on the question of what is most needed for the economy. Is it reducing the deficit now, or is it government making investments in education and infrastructure? And it's a 48% on one side, 49% on the other. That's the story of this election that's coming. But the improving attitudes toward immigrants, I think, has to do with the actual drop in the number of immigrants coming to this country in the last couple of years. So it's no longer viewed as a serious challenge, and tied in, I think, to this broader change in this sort of acceptance, and I think some deep embarrassment on the part of people across the country as to what some of the actions that Arizona and others are taking that it seems so out of proportion to the nature of the challenge that we face.
And if I know correctly, you guys also look at marriage equality in the survey and people's opinions on that. Changes, shifts, stayed the same?
Well, it's been fascinating. Over the 30 years, the beauty of the 30 years now is that we can ask, were the 20-year-olds 20 years ago more like the 40-year-olds today, so it's a change that has changed them and will continue, or are they more like the 20-year-olds today, starting out in their lives and seeing the world from the perspective where they are in their career trajectory? And when you look at gay rights, people have changed dramatically and in a way that is a generational divide and suggests as older folks move off into the sunset and younger folks come along, we're going to look back 30 years from now on our attitudes to gay rights and say, what was the big deal here? What's the issue? These are human beings like anyone else. This is part of the natural human variation. It's not a moral issue. It has to do with comfort with people with diversity. So you can watch, so one question we asked back in 1991, it said, are you in favor or opposed to allowing homosexual couples to legally adopt children? Only 19% were in favor. In 2011, the last time we asked that question, last year, 57% were in favor. Just striking. And so, but meanwhile, abortion attitudes have not changed at all in 30 years.
An author I was talking to was writing a book, and she was revisiting characters she hadn't seen in a while. And she was concerned with, does a person change, or the ways they viewed things at one point are the same in the future? And she decided through her research and saying that once you have set your value system, that remains throughout your life. Shifts in survey could be in population growths and changes, and there's more younger people. What did you find?
So we are fascinated by age differences.
So what do we find?
So it depends on the question. One of the questions that is purely an aging process and not a generational shift. How do you think you'll be doing financially 3 or 4 years down the road? Think you'll be doing better, about the same, or worse? If you're starting out in your career, wherever it is, you have reason to think, I'm going to be doing better. When I'm 20, when I'm 30, I'll be doing better than when I'm 20. When you're 55 or 60, you have much less reason to think you're going to be doing better. And so that's a beautiful example of a question where the 20-year-olds of 20 years ago look like the 20-year-olds today and not like the 40-year-olds today. Right. So those kinds of questions are ones that have to do with the aging process, where you are in your life trajectory. And then there are others that have to do with absorbing the world. When you come of age in your early 20s, you experience that world. Mm-hmm. And there's a fundamental law of human nature that says what I am familiar with feels right and natural, and what I'm unfamiliar with feels unnatural and somehow not quite right. So us older Anglos can learn, but we never learn it in the same sort of taken for granted way that younger Anglos do. So the last 30 years, Anglos have been growing up in a world that is more and more ethically diverse, more and more accepting of homosexuality, and more sort of into this 21st century world where they are just much more comfortable with those realities.
So basically the music I like as a 20-year-old is the music I'm going to like the rest of my life. Probably,
but you can still learn to like some other music.
Transportation. We look at this city, and there's, of course, you drive anywhere in the city today, and things are being torn up again because they're working on more light rail.
Right.
Do we like that? Don't we like that?
We don't like all the disruption.
Well, we don't like the construction, right?
But unmistakably, that's another part of this process. We ask people how important is it to make major improvements to mass transit systems of Houston. How important is it to make major improvements in mass transit for the Houston future? And the percent saying very important has gone dramatically from the 90s to today, where it's 60% saying very important. How important is it to have a rail component? 75%, very important. If we have limited monies to spend on transportation, how should we spend it? Overwhelmingly and consistently, majorities, 55 to 40%, say spend it on better transit rather than on expanding existing highways. We asked, should we continue this process of diverting 25% of metro monies for road repair and non-metro projects, or should all the money be used for metro? 55% say change the procedure so that all the money is used on metro. It's interesting. I mean, this is, again, it doesn't mean we're going to give up but it does mean a new thinking about.
I guess then that ties in together with the flight back into the cities. And as you come into the cities, you want the conveniences in the city.
And when we complete this transit expansion, there will be 30 miles of transit connecting the most important activity centers inside Loop 610, and there will be 65 transit stops. And that's where you can be. So you think, where do you want high-rises to be built? You don't want them built on the corner of Ashby and Bissonnet, right? It's a 2-lane highway, one of the most crowded highways in the streets in Houston, one of the longest streets. It's got low-rise buildings. You're going to build a 23-story building with 260 units, everyone with 2 cars added. You want to build a high-rise within a quarter mile of a transit stop. And if I can get you to live within a quarter mile of a transit stop, and that transit takes you anywhere near where you want to go, and I can turn those transit stops into pedestrian-oriented with wide sidewalks and sidewalk cafes and shade trees and retail downstairs and residents, I can get you to walk that quarter mile and to take the transit. And you can begin to see a city reinventing itself for the 21st century. Doesn't mean that the highways and the big roads and the living in the suburbs is going to go away. It means that we are now providing more choices, more freedom, more options, recognizing that not everybody wants the single choice that we've been offering through most of Houston's history.
In the last minute we have, you've gone through 31 years of this. The trends you see, what does the future hold? Where are we headed?
Well, what is so fascinating, I think, is that the future is yet to be written. Our location in the East Texas oil fields, it was a basis for our wealth in the 20th century, is not going to be the basis for our wealth in the 21st century. Will we make the investments? Above all in education. When you realize that in HISD, right, 204,000 kids from kindergarten to senior in high school, 62% of those kids are Latino kids, 27% are African American, 89% of the children of Houston are African American, Latino. The two groups overwhelmingly the most likely to be living in poverty. 80% of those 204,000 kids qualify for reduced cost or free lunch programs. We know what poverty will do to your ability to succeed in the public school. So I tell everybody it is a safe statement to make that if Houston's African-American, Latino young people are unprepared to succeed in the knowledge economy of the 21st century, it's hard to envision a prosperous future for Houston. So that's one among these three major challenges of education, of quality of life, and of building a truly successful, inclusive, multi-ethnic society. That's the agenda for Houston in the 21st century.
Well, we're going to find out where we're at next year when you come back again and join us, okay? Thank you. Now, to hear more about the survey, our city, and its future, you can tune in Sunday night at 7 p.m. on KUHF 88.7 FM for Interesting Times Houston Area Survey. And Dr. Klineberg will be with me there, too. And also, we invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. And you can go to Houston 8. There you can read more about the guests, learn more about the topic, and even watch past episodes. Next week on Houston 8, a lesson in how to rebuild our personal histories through genealogical research and science. That's next Friday night, 8 p.m., right here on Channel 8. And that does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Maureen Manous. Thank you for joining us, and have a great week.